And welcome everyone to another Smart Money Circle episode. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me today is Sam Rubin, who's the president and CEO of LightPath Technologies, ticker symbol is LPTH. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome to the Smart Money Circle.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here, Adam. I love the show and excited to have an opportunity to be part of it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So, Sam, I always like to begin. Can you tell us a little about your journey and how you got to where you are today, please?
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in Israel, in a very technical family. So as someone that looks at my resume would see, pretty much my entire career has been in the optics industry, optics photonics, and the reason for that is it is literally, I can say, in my DNA. My dad was in this industry from the very beginning. He was in laser industry, the first company that developed a laser for surgery, for surgical use, a CO2 laser back in Israel, where I grew up, and then he went off and started his own company. And I think those two things rubbed off pretty much on me, both the optics part as well as the entrepreneurship part. And the entrepreneurship part partially because of my father and what he's done, partially growing up in Israel, where pretty much doing a startup or something entrepreneurship is a national sport, I could say. So if you start from that and you take that as a handicap, that already in high school I was messing around with lasers and playing with optics, it was a very natural thing for me to go into that from the technical point of view, studying engineering, then starting a startup company. We're talking about the late 90s in Israel. So of course it was a telecom startup company in optical communication, which has taught me a unbelievable amount of things. You know, I can say now a lot of what not to do, and has also taught me how to burn through money inefficiently. So painful lessons there as well. Eventually merged it with another startup company in Israel in telecom and sold both of them together. Moved to the US because I was bored out of my mind, and going to do an MBA seemed like a great way to not work for a couple of years and live in downtown Manhattan. So went to NYU Stern, did an MBA in finance. Great experience there. I mean, could definitely understand after the fact why it is so important to come to an MBA after you have a few years of experience in life. And it's anything but an academic degree, really. It's a very, very great experience. I also later on got an MBA from Harvard Business School. Long story, but essentially have two MBAs. Then went back into the optics industry, tried to do what today is, I guess, called a fundless private equity. I went to try and acquire a company to do a turnaround, and after agreeing to acquire it, went to get the money for it. That didn't work out too well, and instead I joined Thorlabs, which was back then a small company, 30, $40 million. Today is when I left 15 years later, it was $500 million. Um, and in between did a enormous number of acquisitions and kind of entrepreneurship as well. I moved to China for 6 years, set up a operation for four labs there that ended up being close to $100 million in total activities there, and is one of the biggest operations for four labs to date. Did a turnaround of an acquisition, took a small startup within Thorlabs in life sciences and did that. Essentially, you could say I did a informal rotational program at Thorlabs where pretty much, other than working in the accounting department, I was running or managing every department and every aspect of the business at one point or another, and a perfect grooming to be CEO. Unfortunately, the CEO of Thorlabs, who's a very good friend of mine and who's an incredible mentor to me, was not ready to retire. And I kind of had enough of being number two for a very long time. And so set off on my own. LightPath came up as an opportunity, a great opportunity because of what I wanted to do and because of what is happening in the industry, creating some opening for to do something substantial. And so I moved on to LightPath, adding in, the ability to first time run a public company. As a MBA, you always learn about public companies, analyze them inside out, especially in finance, when you do an MBA in finance at a place like NYU. And that's mostly because public companies' financials are available freely. So you can learn a lot about them. But it fascinated me, and I wanted to run a public company, and I got what I wanted.
Wow. Yeah, congratulations. That's a great story. So I'm curious, as the two MBAs, what was the logic and or decision behind that?
So this was a funny story, but essentially, when I was at Thorlabs and doing this sort of development being groomed to be a CEO one day, um, I went and did a lot of programs outside the company for different career development and personal development and so on. I had a great experience at a place called Center for Creative Leadership, CCL, that had a program of leadership development and called it Leadership Development Program. And so when an opportunity came up to do another program, and my boss suggested I look at Harvard, I saw one called also Leadership Development. I felt like I didn't really look into the details of it, to be honest.
Got
I
it.
felt like, okay, that sounds like a great program. In retrospect, it was actually it's how they call their executive MBA. And so I ended up with another MBA. Also, again, I can say that doing another MBA nearly 15 years later gives you another set of perspectives that you didn't realize. And in fact, I recall even doing same case studies that I did in my first MBA, doing them again and getting a very, very different insight and view on them. So
Got
it even more emphasized the importance of, coming to an MBA with sets of experiences.
Love it, love it, love it. So let's talk about your company. Can you please tell the audience what you do, and some of your competitive advantages?
Absolutely. I'll actually start the reverse way a bit. I'll tell you what we used to do and are moving away from, because that's a pretty important part of the story. And LightPath has been around for nearly 40 years. 35 years of those, up until 2020, when I joined the company as CEO, the company was a component manufacturer. Specifically, it invented and developed a technology that allowed for mass production of lenses, optical lenses, in very high volume, very high accuracy. And it enjoyed an incredible market run with that, and very, very heavy in telecom at the time. And that's why the company name was often associated with telecom, which is absolutely not the case now. But what the company didn't do is it did not maintain that competitive advantage. And so the value kept eroding. New companies entered the market because patents expired. People figured out how to develop that technology themselves. Companies started making machines that do the same things that LightPath did. And what used to be an incredible market with unbelievable margins has been slowly slipping away and becoming commoditized. And a lens that maybe LightPath could have charged for it $50 20 years ago could sell for as low as $2 today. And
Oh,
so you
wow.
can imagine what that does to the margins. Even though technology improves and costs go down and so on, it's still an unbelievable change in that.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I came on board, I came to turn the company around away from that slippery slope of, eroding margins. And, to an investor, if you look at the company, it looked like the company was even staggering in terms of growth. What was increasing volumes by far was not showing up in the top line because of the unit prices continuing to decline like that. And so we evaluated the advantages the company has, the regular, SWOT analysis, strategy sessions, spent a lot of time around that, focused at value creation. And I'll talk a lot about that because I very strongly believe in that in terms of strategic view, and decided to take the company upstream, go into more of a system provider and solutions provider, starting to build systems that utilize those lenses with them. and therefore moving away from the commoditization part of the components, moving from lenses that were then down to single dollars even, to now selling subsystems or systems that are up to tens of thousands of dollars unit prices. So very different business in that, but still based on that same core technology, simply instead of allowing the customers that buy the lenses to capture really most of the values that these unique lenses and technology offer, us capturing more of the value by making the subsystems. And so the company today is in a very important inflection point and transition. And you see that in sort of the size of the opportunities and what lies ahead of us. As an example, when we were a component company, an order of $3 million was a big thing for us. I mean, of course, we're, $35 million revenue company, so 3 million, nearly 10% of the business, right, is a big deal, is a important event by itself. But that's sort of the kind of orders, the kind of business you can expect when you're selling lenses for dollars or tens of dollars, right? And so the growth also looks similar to that. Today, we're making, for example, for Lockheed Martin, a camera system that is going into a next generation missile, where per missile, we're going to be somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 camera, okay, each camera. They're looking to make 10,000 missiles a year. We're talking about $50 to $100 million a year just from that one opportunity. And there are actually multiple opportunities of that magnitude in our pipeline. So, of course, I mean, this is simple algebra, right? But ASPs go up and your growth rate goes up. But what is more important here is your value, the values that you create to the customer. If you're able to increase that substantially, the discussions you're having with customers are completely different. When you're a component maker and the customer is designing the system, your value is squeezing out every dollar out of the manufacturing process. It's, if one can call it a strategy, which shouldn't be called a strategy, but it's really about being the lowest cost provider or lowest cost structure to have it. When you're going upstream, when you're saying, okay, I actually now make unique materials, a unique type of glass, that with it you can do XYZ, right? A component company would take that and say, great, I can sell more lenses like that because I can convince the customers what they can do with that glass, why that glass is better to use as a lens. If instead I say, well, okay, what can you do with it? You can do XYZ. Well, I want to do the XYZ. And so we go and develop a camera that outperforms other cameras because of that material. The value we create is much bigger, right? The value we can capture, therefore, is much bigger. Now, it's not always the case, and we've all seen many strategies in which companies create great value but aren't able to capture that value. So as we all know, a good strategy is not only about creating real value to the customer, but having a business plan behind it, having a structure to it that allows you to really capture some of that value. And in our case, capturing that value becomes easier because when we're going and now making subsystems or systems that we are designing, we own that design. And when you're talking about predominantly defense business, once you get into something like a missile like that, that program is there for many years to come, and a change cannot be made to it. And so, and this is why, defense companies operate the way they do. And that is because once you're in, then is when you really make your money, your big time money, right? Even more so on spare parts in the future, but it's a whole other story by itself. But that in essence is, so if you ask me, what is the company doing today? We're no longer focusing on doing components. We're becoming a systems company in the field of imaging, infrared imaging, even more specifically. And we are going to be a major OEM of cameras and subsystems that go into everything from missiles to planes to UAVs, drones, cars even. In 2029, pretty much every new car is going to have a thermal camera in it. Um, Fascinating thing. So, we are becoming a company that is really taking the values that we create from our unique technologies and material and leveraging it to step up the food chain and become someone new.
I love it. That's a great story and very good job on your part by being able to pivot because I like how you started the story with what you did before and then
Yeah.
what you do now, and that value creation is fantastic. So, next question for you, Sam, is how do you handle risk and what are some mistakes do you see people make with respect to risk management?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, as a company that is pivoting like that, and as a company that is now going after some very, very large opportunities like this, Lockheed Martin, like automotive, and so on, there are two types of risk. One is losing the current business and the cash flow that it generates to finance the new business by focusing too much on the new business and on developing that and developing those opportunities that are going to be down the road. And I have to say that is something we did actually didn't get right at first and have seen some decline to our business. Part of it because of lack of focus, maybe part of it bigger geopolitics. And I'll can explain more about that. Um, but the bigger part of risk, I think, for us is when you're now looking at some very big opportunities, they're fairly binary. They're fairly 0-1. It's yes or no. You can completely miss it or completely hit the jackpot. And what companies in this situation I've seen very often do is bet everything on one thing. And that lack of diversification in your opportunities is extremely risky for companies in a situation like we are today. We are lucky that we are very diversified in end markets because optics or photonics is a enabling technology and not a vertical by itself. And so as an enabling technology, it finds its way into many verticals. And with it comes a natural diversification of our revenue base. We have everything from defense to biotech to health and safety to still a tiny bit of telecom left, and so on, right? So that part of risk is naturally mitigated by being in such a diverse set of industries. The second risk is the betting on one horse or betting on one thing. And that is something that we have to constantly keep reminding ourselves and stay aware of that. And so when we talk about our future growth and we talk about transformational opportunities like this Lockheed Martin missile program, we have at any point in time somewhere between 5 to 10 opportunities like that. And of course, for a company the size that is today $35 million, going on 150 in 3 to 5 years, as our plan takes us, and opportunities that could be in tens of millions of dollars per opportunity, we really only need to get a couple of them right. We don't really have to get all of them. And that is something I keep driving to my team. And I also keep driving to investors to remind them of that. We have 3 pillars of growth that drive our growth. One is the defense business, the other is the automotive business, and the third one is the camera business, just going into cameras and such, mainly industrial. Under each one of those pillars, which by themselves are already diversified, they're independent of each other in terms of end markets and such. Under each one of those pillars, we have multiple seven-figure opportunities, right? Seven or eight figures, whatever, above 10 million is, right? So multiple opportunities that can be transformational in the form of being between 10 to say $100 million a year down the road. And that is how we mitigate that risk, right? Is we don't need to bet on the fact that it's going to be Ford or it's going to be GMs that will install our cameras. We're working with both. We don't need to bet on the fact that, is a Lockheed Martin missile going to be successful or is the Apache helicopter program going to be successful? Because one of them would be, or one of, 8 different opportunities like that we have in the defense that are, again, in the tens of millions of dollars. So that to me is addressing the risk part. There's another part of risk that is smaller but always ongoing for a manufacturing operation is a geographical risk and the hit to any one facility. Luckily for us, or luckily for me, I happened to have joined the company exactly when COVID started, and actually a week before COVID hit. And so one of the first things I had to do because of COVID and the risk of shutdown is to build redundancies between all 3 manufacturing plants, one in the US, one in Latvia, Riga, and one in China. And so that helped us already mitigate that risk, that logistical risk, let's say, of one factory being impacted. And today, that impact can be also geopolitical. It could be a geopolitical impact to China. In China, we lost what is 2/3 of the revenue of our operation in China. China used to account to 30% of the business. It is now less than 10% of the business. So we lost 20% of our consolidated revenue, which was coming from 2 customers in China that were blacklisted and we can't sell to them anymore.
Right.
And so that again goes back to that diversification. And yet here we are, back on a growth pattern, refilled that 20% of the revenues that we lost, refilled it with new revenue coming from other streams, and avoided what could have been a catastrophic hit to the company.
Beautiful. No, that makes perfect sense. So from a risk standpoint, you want to make sure you're somewhat diversify or mitigate the risk by looking at other things as well, not just all your eggs in one basket. How about timeless lessons you've learned along the way, Sam, that you'd like to share with the audience? And this can go any direction. It doesn't have to be about business,
Okay,
life,
well,
balance, MBA, your 2 MBAs,
yeah.
anywhere you go.
Okay. Well, I think one important lesson is if you're going to register for a class, read the syllabus, right? I mean,
Fair enough.
figure out what it is before you go and spend money on that. Or you will end up with an MBA you didn't mean to have. But yeah. I think a one very valuable lesson business-wise for me has been, and I managed to do that because I did that transformation from a purely engineer person to a manager, right, and now CEO, and in a industry that's still very technical, so I still get to dive into the engineering part. And I think there are 2 really important lessons, I'll say. One is I go back again to that strategy statement and the value part. As an engineer, you think almost only about the value you create. What features can I add? How is that going to be good? Why is the customer going to need it? Why is this laser going to be better than something else out there? Why is my camera better than something else out there? And when engineers start companies or start businesses, like my startup 30 years ago, or sorry, 25 years ago, you oftentimes completely miss out on the next important question, and that is, how do you capture that value? And so creating value absolutely is a basis to any good strategy if you're going to sell a product, right? That product has to create a value. How do you capture it? And that is a part that, many times engineers miss and took me a very long time to figure out. And maybe it is having 2 MBAs that helped me with that. But capturing the value is, not only about getting paid now, but making sure you're going to get paid 10 years from now on that. So it's maintaining the advantage, it's locking in, it's creating barriers, it's continuously adding to that advantage, continuously creating differentiators for your product, for your company, and so on. Things that as technical people, we engineers, don't think of that way. From our point of view, if I invented something, all I need to do is write a patent and I'm protected and I'll get really rich because I have a patent on it and no one can do it. Well, that's only, maybe a fraction, a fraction of the story behind it. So creating value, but have a plan from day one to capture that value ongoing.
Yeah,
A
that makes perfect
second,
sense. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry, yeah. A second lesson related also to that is there is creating the product and there is go-to market. And you don't have to, again, a company making a product, you don't have to load all the features on it in day one. You don't have to also keep developing to keep adding features and making a best product. The moment you have something, start pivoting towards the marketing of it, start pivoting towards sales of it. In fact, you better not include all the features in day one and have some in the back pocket, because a year later, when someone comes out with a copy of your product, you already have the next generation product,
Wow,
which is a
that's really
feature
smart.
that
That's
you
really
had already before. And
smart.
that's something I have to keep preaching my engineering team and my developers all the time. Stop. Just stop. Okay? And now start pushing it out and keep some of those features in the back burner, in the back pocket, afterwards load them on. But also for us as companies, and again, I can fall into that trap because I'm a technologist and I love the technology. I also need to stop thinking about new products and focus about selling them. And there's a saying that goes, what's the difference between a first-time entrepreneur and a second-time entrepreneur? First-time entrepreneur is thinking of features. Second-time entrepreneur is thinking of the marketing already from day one. And
Right.
that's, to me, a very important lesson.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. I had a really good book that I read one time, Sam. The guy had a good line. He goes, "It don't mean a thing unless it goes ka-ching in business." So if you're in business, it has to go ka-ching like the cash register. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. All right, I love that. Okay, how about timeless mistakes? What are some timeless mistakes you'd like to share with the audience,
Oh
and
my
you
God.
avoid them?
How
Have
much
fun with
time do we have? Yeah.
it.
Um, Actually, of course I have mistakes. I have to say, I can proudly say I don't regret anything to begin with. So I think that's also a very important approach to that. And that is, if you don't regret things and if you're fine and whole with how you did things, you also tend to take a bit more risk sometimes, or tend to think of things a bit more openly than if you're obsessing over mistakes that you've done. Of course, it's important to learn from mistakes and so on. But to put them into perspective is very important, right? Um, I think the biggest mistake that I've done, and I have to say I've done it multiple times, but that is not listening to my gut feeling about an employee. And specifically, I tend to oftentimes, before something bad happens, start developing some gut feeling about it. An employee being a bit disengaging and your gut is telling you something's wrong there. An employee not performing and they see, the people on his team walking around with a long face. Not addressing it head on immediately, whether because procrastinating and just trying to avoid that, whether because there's so many other things on the plate, or whether because you're afraid that dealing with it will blow things up and make it even worse. That is a mistake, has always been. And I've pretty much, I can say that almost every time a person left, I had a feeling that would happen. A key person left. I had a feeling that would happen. Now, not always a mistake. Sometimes, the people that you are fine with them leaving. It's, probably a mutual understanding, if you would, that, they don't fit the culture, for example. They don't fit what it is with the direction we're going. But knowing that and not acting on that, that's definitely a mistake on those things.
And then next question for you. What before I go there, so you're saying trust your gut, and then the mistake would be to not trust your gut. What about when the gut's not right, or you have cognitive dissonance with respect to what you
Well,
feel?
yeah, the mistake is not trying to address it and to just let it slide. Okay.
Okay, got
And, and I think, especially if because you're worried that addressing it will create a bigger problem. In more times than not, people welcome feedback if it's said correctly and done right, and will adjust to it, right? It's when it gets out of control that it's the risk.
Love it. Next question for you, Sam. What about leadership? What are some timeless lessons you've learned about leadership, and what makes a great leader?
Yeah, so one lesson I learned, and this is from my mentor at Thorlabs, Alex Cable, the founder, owner, and CEO of Thorlabs, is never ask an employee to do something you wouldn't do.
Love that. That is so powerful.
And has followed me through, because A, it's a fair thing, right? I mean, it's just, don't treat others the way you don't want to be treated, right? But it also, I find it translates very well into, at the end of the day, how I ask people to do something. And that is, as someone that has been in the military for some years and, has experience sort of other end of just receiving orders or giving orders, and that's it. When you're taking an approach of, I'm not going to ask someone to do something I wouldn't do, you tend to more focus on the ask part and less on the tell someone to do. It also translates into a much better environment, and in a case of LightPath, for example, healthier environment. For example, no pun intended, actually healthy in two ways. One is, obviously the culture part, but at LightPath, for example, when I came on board, we had a very risky process of moving a hot ampule full of melted glass between one furnace to another in a very risky way. And I felt there like I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, that's a part of that, not to do it all together, but a specific portion of that where it was risky. And thinking of that mantra and mentioning to my team that I would not ask someone to do something I wouldn't do, put everyone in the right mindset of how to fix this. And the moment they started thinking of it the same way, a very creative solution came up that didn't even cost a lot and didn't have to require changing the process, but just, solved that risk part in it.
Got it. No, I love that. Make sure that you'll do it and then ask before. Don't just go barking orders and tell people what to do. That makes perfect sense. Final question for you today, Sam, is what's the best piece of advice you'd like to give the audience and or your 30-year-old self?
I would say the most important part is if you're a manager and if you're becoming a CEO or becoming a general manager, don't be afraid of filling your ranks under you with people that are smarter than you and maybe, might put you at risk, as some people would say. To me, it also means, and it's something I've gotten past already, but it took time. Don't be afraid of also filling the ranks with people way older than you. You being young doesn't mean anything. And people don't look at it like, I'm not going to take orders from this 30-year-old, or I'm 50 now, but I was 30 at some point. On the contrary, it's much more likely that if you're 30 years old and a CEO, you need some gray hairs around you to supplement that. And not only don't worry about, someone might take over your place or might put you at risk, you actually need to have that mindset that everyone under you, again, something I learned from Alex Cable is everyone under you should be at a level they could replace you at some point. And everyone is replaceable and everyone will be replaced at some point. So you really need to have a very strong team under you because not because someone is going to step in and replace you, but because you actually will be able to take a holiday and vacation or you can start treating every day as a vacation almost if you have a really good team under you.
Yeah, that is so incredibly profound and brilliant and powerful because every day is a vacation if you have that strong team in place. And you're not operating from a position of fear either. So that's also another big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today and sharing your knowledge with the audience. What's the best way for investors to learn more about LightPath?
The website, absolutely. And as a public company, there are lots of videos out there of investor presentations and talks. I would subscribe to our press releases or LinkedIn. We have a lot going on. I mean, even just this morning, we announced a new LRIP, low rate initial production defense program that is going to turn into a 10% customer within a few months. So pretty good things going on, and people should stay attuned.
I love it. Well, congratulations on your success, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Adam. Has been great. Thanks.